Hi there, this is Mrs. Whalen. Welcome to the Earthworm Lab. I want to take just a moment to show you a live earthworm before we start working with our preserved specimen to go over the internal parts. So I think the live earthworm is actually a really nice example of being able to look at the external structures a little bit better. They're a little bit more colorful. Right now, the earthworm is showing you the dorsal side up, which the dorsal side is going to be the darker side of the earthworm. And then when I turn him over and you look at the ventral or underbelly surface, you can notice that it's a lot lighter. So we'll start on the dorsal surface. You'll notice that towards the top third of the worm, there is a kind of lighter swollen projection right up here. That's called the clitellum. Okay. And actually, when it's time for the earthworms to reproduce, they're going to be using that structure to secrete mucus. And if you notice, as this little guy is trying to crawl around, the very first segment in this head region, this anterior region, is a very skinny, thin segment, which is skinnier than all the rest of them. That first segment is called the prostomium. And if he was in the dirt, he'd be using that to shovel through the dirt and dig through the dirt. And we'll look at, on our preserved worm, I'll show you the mouth a little bit better so that you can actually see the opening. Our earthworms do have a tube-like digestive system where they're going to have a mouth at the anterior end, and at the other end, the posterior end, they're going to have an anus for the solid waste to come out. Now, before I put this little guy back away, I want you to look at his ventral surface again. And I say his, but remember that earthworms are hermaphrodites, so they're an animal that has both male and female parts, and they're supposed to be born that way. And so on the underside of this earthworm, if you feel along the belly, you'll feel on either side of each of these segments what feels like a really, really fine sandpaper. And those little hair-like bristly projections are called setae. And if you look up at your earthworm with a hand lens, you'll be able to see underneath a magnifying lens a little bit better those structures actually sticking out. And obviously they use them to grip the ground as they're crawling around. Up here in this top third of the worm, as you're looking at the ventral surface, you'll notice that there are these kind of swollen, lighter colored projections a few segments back. Let's see if we can get him to sit still for us. Right up here. And those are sperm ducts and oviducts, otherwise can be called male genital pore and female genital pore. And then a little bit further back, you'll see another section where there's a little bit lighter colored swollen area on either side. And those are also male genital pores. So the male has two sets, and I'll explain when we get inside the earthworm why. But in between those two sets of swellings, on the top and back here, you'll see that there's actually a line going from there to there, and that is the sperm groove. That's on either side there. So I'm going to go ahead and put this little guy back away with his friends and take a look at our preserved earthworm over here. Now, I told you earlier I was going to show you the mouth portion. So if you take a peek here, in the anterior area, you can actually put your probe inside of that opening, and you'll see that there is an opening there for the food to enter. And if you were able to put your probe all the way through this earthworm, you would see that it is a tube-like digestive system where the tube goes through the mouth and will go all the way out through the end, through the anus. We're going to go ahead and take a peek inside this earthworm now. And I'm going to start just posterior to the clitellum and on the dorsal surface. Make a real light cut through the skin, all the way anterior to the mouth area. And you can use your dissecting pins, your T-pins, and your forceps if you want, to kind of help pull the skin away. Make sure that you angle the pins away from the animal that you're dissecting. So that you can see the structures inside. It's really difficult on the earthworm to not cut through their internal structures when you're dissecting them, because they're such a thin skin and such a small organism. But you'll notice that I'm just kind of peeling back the skin, and that inside there are all these little cross walls. Remember that earthworms are segmented worms. And the segments aren't just on the outside. You can see those cross walls, those septa, on the inside as well. Earthworms belong to phylum Annelida, with all the other segmented worms. Leeches belong to that phylum as well. And they are class Oligoceta. If you've ever gone fishing with night crawlers, that is one and the same as an earthworm. Okay. In just a minute, I'm actually going to go ahead and trace the path of food through the digestive system of an earthworm. So we'll do that portion first. Okay. So, if you start in the mouth area, right here, food's going to come in through the mouth to the pharynx area, and then underneath that you're going to see a tube that is the esophagus. It's underneath these structures, which is going to lead into kind of a squishy sac here. This is called the crop, and then behind that is a little bit more firm and rubbery section, which is called the gizzard. And the gizzard is connected to the intestine back here. And if you see, the intestine is actually going to be one tube that's going to lead all the way through. And if I were to continue to dissect this worm all the way through, you would see this tube of an intestine go all the way through the earthworm until it leads you to the end, the anus, where the solid waste is going to come out. I'm going to go right back up here to the beginning here. Back up here where I was showing you the intestine, you see like what looks like dirt? Well, it is, because I cut through the intestine just a tiny bit. And so you can see that there was dirt inside that digestive system, inside the intestine. Earthworms do eat dirt. And obviously there's organic matter in there that they can consume. They might be eating things like algae, bacteria, protozoa, rotifers, that kind of thing. And they're going to be able to process the nutrients out of that food. And then the soil is going to continue to pass through and exit their digestive system, because the dirt itself is not providing the nutrition for them. The organic matter in it is. You'll also notice that there's this dark line running along the earthworm. It goes all the way along this dorsal surface, and you can even see it on the outside of the earthworm too, that dark line. And that is the dorsal blood vessel. If you notice, that blood vessel is going to line just right across that intestine, so that the nutrients from that food is going to be able to just diffuse right through those blood vessels and enter the different parts of the body where they're needed. The next thing I'll tell you about is inside these cross walls, these body walls, you'll actually find little coiled up tubes called nephridia. And those nephridia really fine little threads here on the inside of these body walls. And these nephridia are actually to filter liquid waste, and that would act like our kidneys. Now, in an earthworm, there's no bladder to store that urine when it's created. It's actually just going to get released right through pores in the skin. And so as the nephridia filter the liquid waste comes right out the skin. Now, another thing that the earthworm does through their skin actually is they breathe through it, so respiration. And oxygen just diffuses through pores in the skin and diffuses straight through into the blood vessels where it's needed. Now, probably one of the largest structures that you noticed when you're looking at this earthworm, right here, these very large white structures, those are actually seminal vesicles, and the testes are contained in those right here. Okay, and so obviously sperm is going to get produced there. But up here, there's a smaller structure, a little white structure. These are the seminal receptacles. See, it's like a little white dot there. And the earthworm is actually going to receive sperm from another earthworm and store it in that little pouch there. And if you look a little bit closer to the back body wall, you're going to see some other white structures in there, which are the ovaries, which obviously are going to be responsible for producing eggs, and the ovaries are back there. There's some little white structures back in there. The other thing is, when you move these seminal vesicles out of the way, you're going to see these black lines going back and forth horizontally here. And there's actually 5 sets of them. And these are called aortic arches. And those little black lines there, they act like a heart, but it's not exactly a heart. But those aortic arches are going to pump the blood through the body, just like our heart would. One thing we haven't looked at yet is the nervous system of the earthworm. While they don't really have a brain, they do have what are called cerebral ganglia, which is basically nervous cells kind of clumped together in one area. And you'll see like what looks like a little white dot up here near the head region to the side of the pharynx. There's like one on either side. Those are cerebral ganglia. You can also find ganglia just on the other side, just ventral to this area that I'm looking at here. Also, if you move the structures out of the way here, move the digestive system out of the way, you'll see a white line. Let's see if I can bring it up here a little bit closer for you. See a white line lining the inside of the back wall there, the ventral wall, and that is the ventral nerve cord. When earthworms reproduce, I was telling you earlier that they're going to connect right around where this clitellum area is, and they're going to exchange sperm with each other. So they're going to donate sperm to the other earthworm. They're going to absorb it through those male genital pores, and it's going to go into these seminal receptacles here to be stored. Well, then this clitellum structure is going to secrete like a mucousy kind of cocoon, and this earthworm then is going to secrete its eggs and the other worm's sperm, and then it's going to slide out of that cocoon, and those eggs are going to be fertilized and form the larval form, or the young form of these worms. So it is sexual reproduction, even, and they are hermaphrodites, and they cross-fertilize, like we were saying. And I think that's about it. I hope that was helpful. Thanks.